So it's hip hop is born, punk rock is born, all that stuff was done in the 60s. Okay, there you go. The Cultural Revolution of the 1960s starts to really take hold in the 1970s. The feminist movement becomes really strong. Gay rights movement is starting in a wide societal way for the first time. Disability rights movement is starting. The American Indian movement is starting. The Chicano movement is in full force. What's interesting when you look at history is that there is the political side. There are elections, and there are governments, and there are politicians, and there is the cultural side. There's more than that. There's lots of different sides of society. There's our private lives. There's all kinds of things. But in the 70s, the power of the cultural side really kind of starts to outweigh, in a way, the power of the political side. Lots of things start changing culturally. The idea of equality for women, although it does not get played out necessarily politically, becomes something that is believed in. It's hard today to say that men and women are not equal, to say, oh, men are, of course, much better than women, which you would have been able to say not that long ago without people going, boy, you're an idiot. Now you can't do that. Today, you all live in a world in which a gay couple can get married. That was unthinkable in the 1970s. But that's when a lot of that stuff started to come through. The right to an abortion gets determined in the early 1970s. Culturally, it's this huge change. Politically, the 1970s are just bleh. Nothing's going right. Nothing is going right. I mean, the 60s were a mess, right? 60s there's riots in the streets, there's assassinations, there's a hugely unpopular war, there's a lot going on. But the 1970s, everything just kind of, it doesn't collapse, but it just kind of goes, everything goes, bruh. New York City went bankrupt. New York ran out of money. Garbage in the streets. They weren't able to pay their bills. And the government said to them, the federal government said to them, you can take care of yourselves. New York those were crazy days in New York City, dangerous days in New York City, but also punk rock, disco, hip hop. Thank you, New York City in the 1970s. Three presidents in the 70s. Starts with Richard M. Nixon. You got to see one of the videos I sent you was the famous moment in which he said that the Americans need to know that their president is not a crook, and I'm not a crook. One thing you need to know about Richard Nixon, it is the president that everyone could do an impersonation of. My fellow Americans. You always have to put your piece hands up like and shake your jowls like this. I am not a crook. Everyone made fun of him. He was, in a way, the laughingstock of the country. At the same time, why was he the laughingstock? Because he was a crook, and he was going around saying he wasn't a crook. The Watergate scandal. The Watergate scandal started off with a very small burglary, where members of the CRP, Committee to Re-elect the President, or as you pronounced it, CREEP, yes, members of CREEP, were breaking into the office of the Democratic Party to plant bugs so they could spy on them. And part of the whole plan of the Nixon administration to get reelected was to find dirt, find bad things about all of their opponents, and slowly destroy all of the candidates. And they did. It worked really well. Nixon won in a landslide in 1972. And then it all started to fall apart very quickly. And in 1974, he became the first U.S. president ever to say, I resign, I quit, I'm out of here. He did that because he was going to be impeached. But he was never impeached because he quit before they could get it done. This is one of the big reasons why in the 1970s there's this general feeling of you can't trust the government, which is still around today. But I think it really starts taking hold in the 1970s. The president is a crook. Whether he says it or not, he's a crook. And it got played out on television every day. Every day on TV, there would be the hearings from Congress of people within his administration revealing what they were doing. There was the secret tapes. They recorded them. In the newspapers, they'd print out what the recordings say. And this is a great little detail as well of the Nixon administration, is so they'd have to print out what he said. And they'd say, it'd say, Nixon, blah, 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 blah. And then it'd have a little bar and say, expletive deleted. An expletive is a swear word. Richard Nixon dropped the F-bomb and the N-word and every other. He was a foul-mouthed guy. And it all got recorded. And so when they would print it in the newspapers, it'd say, the president said, I think that expletive deleted so-and-so and so. And so it added to the, like, what is going on in the White House? And it led to this general mistrust of the government. The war in Vietnam finally came to an end in 1975 after years of the United States just dropping bomb after bomb after bomb and nothing happening. And the United States just finally left. There was a general sense that you couldn't trust the government. You couldn't trust big business. You couldn't trust there was no one to trust anymore. And there was this very just like things were falling apart in the 1970s. Second president came in was Gerald Ford. Ford had replaced Nixon's first vice president, Spiro T. Agnew, who resigned as well because he was a crook. Because he had accepted bribes back when he was the governor of Maryland, I believe. So two crooks were in the office at the time. So Ford comes in. He doesn't last very long. He lasts only 2 years. And in 1976, Jimmy Carter gets elected. Jimmy Carter is a classic outsider. He's not, no one expected him to win. No one knew who he was. He was a peanut farmer from Georgia. He had been the governor. And he got in and he was going to change the system. And his 4 years, because he loses in 1980, his 4 years were just kind of a big failure, to tell you the truth. He got some stuff done. He put solar panels on the roof of the White House in the 1970s. Why were they putting solar panels on the roof of the White House? Because the oil crisis. That's another video I ask you guys to watch. The oil crisis happened in the early 70s. OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, stopped selling oil to the United States as a punishment for the United States' support of Israel in the war. In the Middle East, another thing that happens in the 1970s, the Middle East becomes the focus still today. Still have troops today in the Middle East, and it's been like that since the 1970s. 1970s is when this all starts. OPEC puts blocks oil sales to the United States, lines down the street to buy gasoline. Gasoline prices went up 10 times on day. It went from 40 cents a gallon to $4 a gallon. In the U.S., they sell their gasoline in the gallons. Here we sell it by liters, which is about a fourth of a gallon. So here prices would have gone from like 10 cents to $1. Boom. Everyone stops. Everyone's like, why am I driving this big car? Cars used to be huge. In the 50s and 60s, cars were huge. My God, we had a car when I was growing up that felt like it was 20 feet long. It was a gigantic car. All of a sudden, people started buying little tiny cars. That's changed. That's still around today, and that's sort of like the beginning of the U.S. the United States questioning oil. Should the United States be dependent upon on oil to run its economy, which we are still having that debate today. Um, the oil crisis also provokes unemployment. Unemployment is what? When people lose their jobs, when people can't find work. Something that's happening right now. Right now in the United States, there's record unemployment. 30 million people are unemployed because of the coronavirus. And another thing that happened was inflation. Inflation is something that none of you have ever seen, you young 13-year-olds, or however old you are. There's never really been inflation while you guys been alive. Inflation is when prices go up. They inflate like a balloon. Um, so that milk gets more expensive and more expensive and more expensive all year. When you go to the grocery store, every time you go, it's a little bit more expensive, a little bit more expensive. And so the money that you make is not going up. Your wages aren't going up. So it's harder and harder to buy things, and it makes life much more difficult. There are other places in the world now that have hyperinflation, where the prices go up, they double, they triple, boom, boom, boom. It was never like that, but it was just a slow, creeping inflation, and things are just getting harder and harder for people. Unemployment's harder and harder to find work. Things are not going well in the 1970s. And then to end the 1970s, in 1979, in Iran, they have a revolution and they throw out the Shah. The Shah is it's the Persian word for king. And they take hostage 50 or 60 U.S. workers at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, capital of Iran, and hold them hostage for about a year. This is daily news in America. It's the first time that there's a nightly news show. Right now, we live in a world where there's cable news constantly. There's always news on, news, 24 hours. Always news, always news, always news. It didn't used to be like that. It used to be every day, there was a half-hour news at 5:30, every day at 5:30. At 5 o'clock was the local news. At 5:30 was the national news. And at 6, you had some more local news. And then at 10 o'clock, you had another news show. That was it. Now there's news all the time, all the time, all the time, all the time. That started with the hostage crisis in 1979. Because every night, ABC News, like a special report, America held hostage, day 42. Next day, day 43. And that really sparked, that's one change that you still see today. Why did the Iranians take U.S. Embassy workers hostage? The United States has supported the Shah. But we have to stop here and go back to the 1950s, because it's not just that the United States supported the Shah. It wasn't like which the United States supports dictators all over the world. But it's because of the United States that Iran even had a Shah. Because back in the 1950s, the Iranian president, duly elected by his people, wanted to nationalize the oil. Again with the oil. Nationalize means that the country would take control of its own oil production, rather than it being run by foreign corporations from Britain and from the United States. And so wanted to have control of their own natural resources. The United States and Britain were not happy about that, and so they overthrew the president. I don't know if they had him assassinated or not, but they overthrew him and installed a new leader and a new title, a Shah. There had not been a Shah before. It wasn't like there was hundreds of years of there being a Shah of Iran. No, the United States invented that and put it that, or created that. Invented. The idea of a Shah was there, but they put one into Iran for the first time. And that Shah ruled from the late 1950s until the 1970s in brutal ways. And so the people of Iran know that. They are like, It's because of you, United States, that we had a dictator. It's because of you that our people were tortured by this dictator. So there was no love lost, as they say. The hostage crisis, as it was known, costs Carter the election. Carter loses the election. I mean, how could he not win? How could he win the election? There was a bad economy, and there's hostages being taken. The hostages get released right after his successor, the next president, is inaugurated in 1980. That successor was Ronald Reagan. Why did the Iranians release the U.S. hostages the moment that Ronald Reagan was elected? Well, the reason is that Ronald Reagan, when he was running for president, sent emissaries, sent his aides, to talk to the Iranians and to the people holding the U.S. hostages. And he said, whatever you do, don't release the hostages before I get to be president. Because then, if you did that, it would be really good for Carter. So, keep the U.S. hostages, and then when I'm president, you release them, and I'll make it worth your while. We'll get into that whole controversy in the 1980s. So that's the 1970s. It's the malaise, the decade of the malaise. You watched a little clip of Jimmy Carter giving his speech. The clip I showed you was in black and white, which was not in black and white when it was broadcast on TV, and with sad music in the background. Did not have that soundtrack when it was on TV. But it's a speech in which it's fascinating to me watching that speech, because it's him just saying, what's going on, America? Like, we don't believe in each other. We've lost our confidence. We're just spending and buying things, and where's our spirit? And it's the first time, it's really the only time that you've seen a president or a politician just say, what's wrong with us? Like, what happened to us? Why are we so, why have we lost the spirit of life? No one's ever given a speech like that afterwards, because it went over so badly. Everyone just like, oh, that was the worst speech ever. But it's interesting because it does kind of speak a lot of truths. And Carter was trying to raise the question of like, let's not, like, should we base our society on buying things or on communities being together? Well, you know who won that debate. Anyways, the 1970s. There we go. I'll send you guys your test tomorrow. Anything else you need to know about the 1970s? 1970s. That's it.